Hey everyone, welcome to the program WRSA Radio. I am your host, Grenadier One. As always, I hope you are having a good week. I have had an excellent one, and an excellent one last week as well. Good vacation. I got to spend time with friends and family and people who I trust, and did some training and some other things. It was cool. It was very good. And best of all, I got to step away from the day job and those responsibilities, which is it's always good, I guess. It's a good thing, but when you get back in the office and you have to deal with all of that stuff, it's almost not worth being away for more than a few days. But anyway, what do we have on hand for you this week? Well, we are going to get into that idea that the WEF is pushing, and something that I believe we will be seeing more and more of as time passes. And that is, what am I talking about? The concept of you will own nothing. Okay, and I know the WEF tacks on the and you'll be happy, but we're just going to focus on the you will own nothing portion of this. We've already been seeing this kind of permeate the government for a very long time, for decades, really. And for some time, we've seen this in certain spheres of the private sector, but it's coming more and more into the main with the corporate world. This is a big driver for these concepts that they are pushing. The idea is that corporations will maintain control and ownership of all the products that they sell if those products are not consumable. In other words, you're not going to be leasing toilet paper, but you're going to be leasing just about everything else. And if they could find a way to make you lease toilet paper, I'm sure they would. But in any rate, so for example, the cell phone that you carry will no longer be your cell phone. It will belong to the carrier. So when, for example, the government comes to get the information on the device, you can't claim that it's your private data because you don't own the device. You only use the device. Do you see how this works? I think you can, with a slight bit of forethought, understand how pernicious and insidious this is. It goes well even beyond that, really far down to exactly what they say. You will own nothing. We will lease everything. Maybe you've heard about the big civil cases that have worked their way through court systems. Some have even been heard in court, like the case of John Deere tractors. Farmers who use this big John Deere machinery. We're talking about these massive combines and harvesters and things like this. Not necessarily your little lawn tractor, but that as well. The big stuff. They ran into this situation a number of years back where John Deere had sold them these tractors and then locked them out of all of the functionality or the ability to repair these tractors. Basically shut the tractors down if the farmers did any kind of repair work on these machines themselves. It was, this is way past, you void your warranty if you do this. No, they were requiring farmers to use authorized John Deere technicians and parts, so they couldn't use any kind of third-party parts. They couldn't use any third-party repair services or providers or anything like that. They locked out all these functions, all of these aspects of these vehicles from the farmers, and they refusing to sell repair parts in some cases. No, you can't do that yourself. We don't sell that directly to you. You've got to go to this authorized technician to get that. Repairs that the farmers could do literally in the field themselves in a matter of a few hours are now taking days to get done because they're having to wait on these authorized John Deere techs to bring them authorized John Deere parts and do the repair work. So it's costing them not only the fees for the repairs, but the downtime that they're facing for not having that machine working. So they took John Deere to court. This is the right to repair lawsuits that have been going around. It's been kind of out there in the auto industry as well for some time, but it really kind of hit ahead with these agricultural systems. So several lawsuits are filed. And now let me tell you what happened here, because this is something kind of interesting. In order to avoid the courts giving final rulings on this, John Deere finally, just back in January of this year, signed an MOU with several of these growers associations, these farmer groups, agricultural associations, and representatives. And that agreement opened up the repair and maintenance, but it put an end to the lawsuits. Because what that really means is that John Deere conceded to the demands because they didn't want the courts to provide a ruling that would shut this concept down for everybody else and shut it down completely into the future. So you have to consider that others probably went to John Deere and told them, hey, look, you're pushing this a little too soon, and we're not ready to roll this out in full force yet. So you have to give in for now while we build this, because we don't want the courts to rule on this yet. We don't want the courts to side with the private sector or the private owners. We want them to side with us, so we have to hold back now. And more we're seeing this in the private sector. This is the downstream effects from the privatization of government force. See, I'm fine with the idea of the private sector doing some of the jobs for government, because the government sucks at everything it does, but that's a two-edged sword, okay? It's one thing, for example, to have a private entity running the water department or something like that. That can be good. You get these, efficiencies of scale and things like that, and a little bit better administration and not as much of the red tape and overhead and all that. So you can get a lot of really good things from that kind of arrangement. But it's quite another thing for a private entity to be used by the government to violate the rights of citizens. The government has learned that they can use these private entities to get around laws and get around your rights. And there's little that you can do about it, because you can't really make the case that you own something and have the right to use it privately if in fact you're simply paying a subscription fee for it, or even if you're paying nothing for it, and the business model is that entity gets ad revenue when they show you ads. No one's been able to make the case that you own your YouTube data, because you use YouTube knowing that they own the data and can do what they want with it, including give it to the government, and you have no real expectation of privacy. Your internet provider, for instance, could provide your data to the government without a subpoena. They could just willingly hand it over, and they are doing that. And you have very little expectation of privacy because you're using them, a third party, in the middle of what you consider to be private information. It's really not. All of this is kind of an outgrowth of that. Those were the first steps. Those things becoming more prevalent and more persistent led to these other companies saying, well, wait a minute, I need to be able to get in onto that game. If you're using this government power and this exclusivity, well, then I should be able to do that too. So more and more, corporations are changing this customer relationship. You are being evolved from being at least tacitly equal, if not slightly more in control, the controlling partner of this business customer relationship, to being seen as basically a commodity. You're a herd, and you provide sustenance to the corporation and the government, which is to say you provide sustenance to the elite who run both of those things. To give you another example, recently, and this happened a few months back, it just sort of came to light a few weeks ago, and I didn't get a chance to touch on it during the weeks that I was kind of seeing information about it. We had a situation where a game company, this is Hasbro. You guys are probably familiar with Hasbro growing up. They made all kinds of toys and games and things that you played with when you were a kid. Well, they have a division called Wizards of the Coast, which is a game company that produces a card game. You may have heard Magic the Gathering. It's a collectible game. And Wizards of the Coast releases these annual or semi-annual releases of new cards for this game. And these are big packages. It's not like, one or two cards. It's hundreds of cards for this game in one big box here. And they do this a couple times a year. But anyway, keep in mind these are printed physical cards. So when you set a release date for a product like that, you have to print them up. Hey, we're going to release these on, July the 1st. Well, you got to print them up well in advance and send them off to your distribution channel so that the stores will actually have them on hand to sell them to the customers on July the 1st, right? So they got to be done way in advance, way ahead of time, printed out, shipped out, all this kind of good stuff. Well, a YouTuber who covers these card games as the content for his channel put in an order to a distributor, and there was a mix-up. And the deal is this latest new release that Wizards of the Coast is putting out, which was supposed to premiere here sometime in June, I believe. It has a very similar name to the prior release. It's kind of like Part 2. So the speculation was that there was a mix-up and that somehow this YouTuber put in an order for Part 1 and he accidentally got a box sent to him of Part 2, this unreleased box yet, all prior to the release date. Now it's possible this was some kind of insider thing that this guy, had going on with the distributor. Hey, look, this thing, this looks really suspiciously like the prior box. Can't we, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, you just accidentally on purpose send me one of those new ones? Who knows? There's all kinds of things that go on with YouTubers and things to try to get content and all that. I could understand that being, a potential problem, and I could understand Wizards of the Coast being upset about that because it sort of, takes all of the shine off of their new release and all of the glow off of it, if you will, if somebody gets that information weeks in advance and tells people all about it. So, part of their thing is they depend on this kind of buzz to sell their products. So I can understand them being a little upset about it. But anyway, what happened next was just truly bizarre, though. If that situation isn't goofy enough, this is truly bizarre. This YouTuber makes video content on these new cards, and he starts tearing open these boxes and getting into these cards and showing it on his channel. Well, Hasbro, in its infinite wisdom, gets the bright idea to hire literal Pinkerton detectives. And the Pinkertons go track this guy down, and they go to his house, and they intimidate him and his wife by threatening to file criminal charges against this guy. And they demand that he hands over this box of cards. Now, keep in mind here, this guy purchased the cards. He bought them. He put in an order with the distributor. He paid for them out of his own money. And these boxes are not cheap, okay? We're talking about, $100 plus, maybe more. I haven't priced these things in a long, long time, so I don't really know what they go for, but it's not cheap, okay? It's not the little $5 packs of cards. We're talking about $100, $200, something like that here. So they demand that he gives them the cards, and they didn't pay him any money for them. They just took them. He gives them over to them because they were threatening him. And he's out his money. He purchased these things. It's not his fault that there was a mistake, that they accidentally gave him the wrong thing. If that's his story. Well, who cares really if that's accurate or not? The problem here, this is a civil case. It's not a criminal one. And this guy's just some geek YouTuber. And so I'm not shocked that he just rolled over and gave him the cards. But the fact is that this is a game company. And they decided that not only is it, a great idea, but that they have the power and the clout to weather the storm of this PR disaster, to hire these thugs to go intimidate a YouTuber into submission. It's insanity. The case was against the distributor. If Hasbro had a problem, they should have gone to the distributor and said, "Hey, you can't allow this to be happening here. You need to look at your employees. Maybe there was some kind of connection there, and this employee, released this box out to this guy because they had something going on. But you fire that employee for that, okay? You don't go after the guy on the end that got the cards, okay? That's not what you do. And even if you wanted to go, hey, you know what? Why don't we call the guy up and say, hey, man, can you take down this content and delay it until the release date of the new product? And if you do, hey, guess what? We'll give you a second box that you can sell and get your money back. Or, hey, here's a little money. We'll help sponsor your channel. They had 100 different ways that they could have handled this that would have been a benefit to them and a positive outlook for them. But they chose intimidation. And they chose intimidation because they believe, probably rightly, that they can get away with it. And this is where we are. Corporations big and small are feeling this swag that they have. They're growing into this new dynamic that we are in, whereby they have assumed this mantle of power and authority. Now, the last case I want to touch on here is coming to light just this week, and I think it's maybe the last hurdle that we're going to see crossed before we get to that final, peak corporate power. That peak being when corporations have no fear of just outright taking your life to achieve their goals, because they know for sure they will face no consequences for it. Well, let me back up. Corporations other than Big Pharma, let's clarify that because those guys are already there. But at any rate, that last hurdle being that of your private property. Corporations have already been assaulting the rights of private property owners, as we've been talking about, for a long time. In fact, we have an anniversary this week of a case of government and a local business doing it to an individual, and that individual reaching his final straw and treading back, and that being the case of Marvin Haymeyer and the Killdozer. If you don't know what that case is, go look it up. It's a fascinating situation. That anniversary of the Killdozer was this week. But this week we're hearing of a corporate government scam that is building in South Dakota. And apparently one of these global warming companies has cooked up this boondoggle scam, and that's my opinion, it's a boondoggle scam, to fleece taxpayers out of money. And they sold it to the government of South Dakota, and they got everybody on board, the green weenies, and I'm sure there were Republican rhinos because this company apparently donates a lot of money to the GOP. Anyway, this involves, and I shit you not here, guys, the piping of carbon dioxide from ethanol production plants through underground pipelines across the state of South Dakota to some kind of, quote, safe underground storage facility. Safe storage of carbon dioxide. So the gas that plants use to make food is toxic and has to be pumped underground and stored in a safe space. I wonder if that safe space has bridges to nowhere and monorails. I don't know, just throwing that out there. Anyway, if that wasn't bad enough, this corporation is pushing for the government use of eminent domain to seize the property to build this pipeline from South Dakota farmers. And to achieve this miracle of modern science and extra super grande vital public work project, they figured out, or they have to figure out what property they want to steal from the farmers. So they have been sending their survey teams out onto these farms without permission to do the surveys. The farmers are reporting that these surveyors have entered not only to the fields, crossing fence lines and going out into the woods and things like that, but into their sheds and their barns, and in some cases into the actual homes of the farmers while they were not there. And all of this without any permission sought, whatsoever. No permission given to them. Now, folks, private property is the central defining metric of Western civilization. If we do not have private property, then we do not have a society. Now, there are limits and there are reasons for those lines to be crossed in the most extreme situations. I mean, we could argue for hours and weeks about hypotheticals and things where, those that dynamic is in play. But that's not what we're talking about here. This is well beyond that. This is a private company sending its employees and contractors to violate the last sacred measure of the citizen in the name of the most absurd and ridiculous government and corporate scheme that has no business even being thought of, much less implemented. This is a line that cannot be crossed without some pushback, and the farmers of South Dakota must not let this stand. They must push back on this, and we have to do what we can to help them. The employees of this company, they should not be able to spend more than a few hours in South Dakota. They should not be able to find a hotel room. They should not be able to buy a drop of gas or a scrap of food. They should not be able to get their tires patched up when those tires are mysteriously slashed. They should not be able to find a camping site to lay their heads down for the night. No one should take a single red cent from these people. Do not allow them to buy anything from you. And that is the only way this gets stopped. They can pass all the laws they want, but they've got to implement them. They got to live there while they're trying to make that happen. And there's fallout from that. Public shunning works both ways. We talk a lot about cancel culture, and we're the victims of cancel culture, but we can cancel them just like they cancel us. Okay, we can refuse to do business with them. I'm not really talking about a boycott here. I'm talking about, people firing them. You as a business owner or provider of service, you have the right to fire your customers if you don't like them. Well, fire these people. Yeah, you want to drive your truck out there, wait till it runs out of fuel because you can't buy a gallon of gas to put into it. Sorry, we don't sell gas to you. That is a way. That is a thing. It's a peaceful way to operate, and in truth, it's probably the last thing we have before things go to a place that they can't come back from. Now, that's all I got time for this week. Like and subscribe. Come see us over on Gab and the Mothership, and I will see you on the next episode.